So this one took me back to Mrs. Eldred's 8th grade American Studies class, but I couldn't resist going back through this one. So when the Civil War began in 1861, of course, the United States split in two, but so did thousands of American families. And Across 5 Aprils tells that story, not through generals or battlefields, but through the eyes of one boy watching his world fall apart from his family farm in Illinois. And it's the story of growing up during the darkest years of, well, the American experiment, when loyalty and love and conscience didn't always point in the same direction. I'm Matt Hasquin. I'm a high school history teacher, and I like to talk about things that I think we all should know. And this was one I just kind of came across. It came back into my mind after having read it all those years ago, and just wanted to share it. I don't know if this kind of thing's taught in schools anymore, but I sure enjoyed it, and it's one of the reasons why I took such a love of history and decided to be part of, be in a classroom the rest of my life too. This novel, it opens in April of 1861 on the Creighton family farm in southern Illinois, and there's a 14-year-old named Jethro Creighton, and he's the youngest child, and he's kind of curious, and he's kind of innocent, and he's a boy who sees the world in simple terms of right and wrong. But he soon learns that war really doesn't have that kind of simplicity. His older brothers and their neighbors, they all take sides, and some for the Union and some for the Confederacy, and then suddenly the boundary between the North and the South runs right through their own family kitchen table. And for the next 5 Aprils, from Fort Sumter all the way up to Appomattox, Jethro grows up while the world around him just kind of unravels. So Irene Hunt, the author, her genius lies in how she turns this national conflict into a family tragedy. Because the Creightons aren't rich or powerful, they're just ordinary farmers. But their story captures the moral chaos of the American Civil War. Bill Creighton, who is Jethro's favorite brother, loves his family, but feels sympathy for the South. Not for slavery, but for what he sees as states' rights and local independence. His brother Tom and cousin Eb fight for the Union. Their neighbor Ellen, Ellen's nephew, fights for the Confederacy. And then when Bill finally leaves to join the Southern Army, the Creightons' grief is personal. It's a heartbreak that kind of mirrors what's happening in the nation. So in one family, Irene Hunt is showing how the Civil War, how civil wars aren't actually fought between strangers, but they're actually between people who once shared the same supper table. Jethro becomes kind of the emotional center of the novel. And as the war letters arrive from the front and the news of battles, spreads, Shiloh, Antietam, Gettysburg, Jethro is forced to grow up too fast. He must run the family farm after his father falls ill. He must face harassment from neighbors who accuse his family of disloyalty, and he has to navigate the sorrow of loss as friends and relatives die or they just disappear. Now, though, through Jethro, Irene Hunt explores how the home front endured its own kind of battle, one that was not fought with rifles, but instead there's loneliness and doubt and just endurance. Across 5 Aprils is a coming-of-age story that's set against the backdrop of what was, America's greatest moral crisis. And the central themes here are pretty timeless. They remain timeless. There's a moral complexity here because Hunt refuses to paint the war in just black and white. Even noble causes come with pain, and even good people make choices that hurt others. There's also an issue of family and forgiveness because the Creighton story is one of compassion. It's a family that's trying to love one another across some impossible divisions. There's also growth and understanding that takes place because Jethro begins as a boy who's full of questions and ends as a young man who's seen too much. And he's a little wiser and sadder, but he does remain hopeful. Now, Irene Hunt based her story, the story here, on her own grandfather's memories. He really did grow up in southern Illinois during the Civil War. And that's what gives the novel a sense of authenticity. The details of farm life, the letters, the dialect, the fear of Confederate raids, and also the bitterness that existed between neighbors. The book reminds readers that the Civil War wasn't just fought on distant battlefields. It was lived every day by people who had to choose between country and kin. As far as its legacy, it was published in 1964, and it was an immediate success. It earned a Newbery honor, and it was placed in classrooms across the country. It stood out because it didn't glorify war; it humanized it. Instead of heroes and villains, it gave us brothers and neighbors. And instead of these victory speeches, it gave us like quiet endurance. It's often called the most honest Civil War novel written for young readers, and for good reason. By the end, as peace finally returns in April of 1865, Jethro realizes that war's real legacy isn't just loss. It's the question of how to live again afterward. Well, and the reason that Across Five Aprils matters, why it matters, it teaches a simple but vital truth that understanding and empathy are as important as bravery. It shows that patriotism means more than fighting for your side. It means caring about what happens to your country when the fighting ends. And in an age that is still divided by ideology, Irene Hunt's story reminds us that real courage sometimes means listening and forgiving and moving forward together. And that's Across Five Aprils. It's a Civil War epic that's seen through the eyes of a young boy. It's a story about how families survive when nations struggle to. And it also kind of points out how growing up sometimes means learning that the hardest battles actually happen, inside the heart. Thanks again, Mrs. Eldred. Appreciate it. Thanks for hanging around and watching. And thanks again, guys. I'll have something else later on.